decision was made after very careful consideration, including the important concerns some have raised about religious liberty. I believe the proposal strikes the appropriate balance between respecting religious freedom and increasing access to important preventive services. There are only 3 balancing tests that I am aware of when it comes to matters of constitutional significance. There is the rational basis balancing test for economic legislation. There is the intermediate or mid-level scrutiny for gender-related constitutional issues. And then there is the heightened or strict scrutiny when fundamental rights are involved. And given the fact that I am sure you can see that religious liberty is a fundamental right, which of those 3 constitutional balancing tests were you making reference to when you said you balanced things?
Congressman, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't pretend to understand the nuances of the constitutional balancing tests.
But you would agree it's
you're talking about the preventive services.
You would agree it's a legal issue, right? I mean, we're going to wind up in this. Last time I was at the Supreme Court, I think you and I were there the same day during the oral argument. This mandate is going to wind up in the Supreme Court. To me, it is. We can talk about the politics all we want to. I want to talk about the law. I want to talk about balancing religious liberty with whatever else you think it's appropriate to balance it with, because you use the word balance. Which of those 3 tests is the appropriate test for us to use when considering religious liberty?
Again, Congressman, I am not going to wade into constitutional law. I'm talking about the fact that we are implementing the law that was passed by the Congress, signed by the President, which directed our department to develop a package of preventive health services for women. We have done just that with the advice of the Institute of Medicine and promulgated that rule.
Do you agree with me that government cannot force certain religious beliefs on its citizens?
Yes, sir.
And why can they not do that?
Why can government not force religious beliefs?
What's the basis of that?
The separation of church and state.
Well, the Constitution, right? The First Amendment. Can government decide which religious beliefs are acceptable and not acceptable?
No, sir.
And why can they not do that?
It's part of our Constitution.
It's a legal analysis. I mean, for me, this is not a political analysis. It is a legal analysis. So, before this rule was promulgated, did you read any of the Supreme Court cases on religious liberty?
I did not.
You would agree with me that our society has a compelling interest, not just an important interest, a compelling interest in having an educated citizenry, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. So when a state said you have to send your children to school until a certain age, and a religious group objected because they did not want to send their children to school until that certain age, do you know who won? It went to the Supreme Court. The religious group won. I think the state has a compelling interest in banning animal sacrifice. Whether it's compelling or just important is irrelevant for purposes of this discussion. When a state banned the practice of animal sacrifice and a religious group objected, it went to the Supreme Court. Do you know who won that?
I do not, sir.
The religious group won. I think the state has an important interest in having license tags on automobiles so law enforcement can know who they're dealing with. When a religious group objected to having a certain license tag on their cars, it went to the Supreme Court. Do you know who won?
I do not.
The religious group won. And most recently, I happen to think government has a compelling interest in avoiding gender discrimination. But this administration took to the Supreme Court a case, Hosanna Tabor, where a religious group wanted to decide who its teachers were, even if it meant gender discrimination. It was a 9-0 opinion in favor of religious liberty. So when you say you balance things, can you understand why I might be seeking a constitutional balancing instead of any other kind?
I do, sir, and I defer to our lawyers to give me good advice on the Constitution. I do not pretend to be a constitutional lawyer. No.
Is there a legal memo that you relied on? At least when
I relied on discussions.
at least when Attorney General Holder made his recess appointments, there was a legal memo that he relied on. Is there one you can share with us?
Attorney General Holder clearly runs the Justice Department and lives in a world of legal memos.
Do you have attorneys?
I'm sorry, the gentleman's time has expired.